There was a collaboration. There was a working relationship between federal law enforcement and the Zambada faction of the Sinaloa Cartel. So when Zambada actually when the son actually got sent to the United States, his attorneys were able to use that dynamic as leverage. He ended up getting only 14 years. Well, and when the attorneys tried presenting this in court, the United States government actually declared national security and precluded the attorney from San Diego from testifying. That was part of the reason for why they had to settle the case.
It's a lot of information. I'm going to get to something, but before that, you talked about Zambada, but some of the other things that's happened recently with the Sinaloa Cartel was El Mayo, the capturing of El Mayo.
Sure.
One person I interviewed believes that El Mayo was connected to, at that time, some kind of CIA connection. Is there any word of that? Have you heard any of that? That there's a tie into that?
Well, after 9/11, it was common knowledge throughout the higher level trafficking community that Sinaloa had been approached, and word on the Mexican side was no Arabs are to go into the U.S. Like, they shut down the border, notify them about any Arabs trying to get into the country. So some agency contacted them. Now, who did it? No one knows. I'm not going to speculate. But there was an effort on their part to make sure that no Arabs were coming across the border. Now, it's not so much a contact with the CIA. What's documented is the contact with the Department of Justice. Because like I said, for 7 years, they fed information to DOJ and to the DEA for the purposes of taking out their enemies.
Right.
Now, there was a second incident where the attorney in San Diego, after doing this for 7 years, he wanted to step down. He's an older guy. He wants to retire. So they needed to put a new substitute that's going to be the conduit for information. Well, Zambada put his son in that position. So Vicente Zambada, the heir apparent, one of the biggest drug lords in all of Mexico, he's meeting with DOJ officials. He's meeting with DEA officials. And the American government officials are operating in Mexico without declaring their presence. And so this whole thing blew up because there was a meeting in DF in Mexico City where Zambada left the meeting with the Americans, gave them the intel that they were there for. And as he's walking out of the hotel, some cop notices him. Like, this is one of the most wanted men in Mexico. So he calls for backup and they arrest Zambada Jr., Vicente. And so when they arrest him, he's like, what are you guys doing? I'm here helping you. Like, what do you mean you're helping us? You're under arrest. He's like, no, I'm here meeting with the gringos. Like, gringos? What gringos? They're up in room 404. The Mexican police stumble upon a whole group of guys from Washington, D.C. and California that were operating clandestinely in Mexico. See, this was an enormous story in Mexico. Didn't get so much coverage here in the United States. But there is not a Mexican national in Mexico who is not convinced the American government created Sinaloa.
Really?
It'd be the equivalent of John Gotti's son meeting with Donald Trump Jr. I mean, it's like, it'd be that kind of a level. And then they caught the federal agents. Like, what are you guys doing here, operating illegally on Mexican soil? And you're meeting with the drug lord? And Vicente Zambada was charged for hundreds of tons already. The guy's coming and going. They never arrested him. There was a collaboration. There was a working relationship between federal law enforcement and the Zambada faction of the Sinaloa Cartel. So when Zambada actually when the son actually got sent to the United States, his attorneys were able to use that dynamic as leverage. He ended up getting only 14 years. Well, and when the attorneys tried presenting this in court, the United States government actually declared national security and precluded the attorney from San Diego from testifying. That was part of the reason for why they had to settle the case. So whatever was happening, an enormous effort was made to conceal it by the American government.
And no one never figured out what federal agency that was?
It was DEA agents out of California and DOJ officials out of Washington, D.C.
Interesting.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So another part of your email, you mentioned, I'm in a position to discuss some of the challenges that our military forces would likely encounter in Mexico. Equally important, we can also discuss the second, third, and fourth order of consequences that we would face here in the United States. I'd love to take the conversation to this. Sure. So first of all, Obviously, the president deemed the cartel as a terrorist organization. And what are some of your thoughts on that alone?
I think that it was a wise move because Trump is clearly setting up a negotiation and he's manufacturing bargaining chips he's going to use with the Mexican government. That way he can agree to suspend the terrorist designation in exchange for the Mexican government doing what he wants. Essentially, he's going to be getting something for nothing. You know, Trump is a very astute negotiator. With respect to the terrorist designation, it's not going to impact cartel operations in Mexico one bit.
Really?
Of course.
Why is that?
The men are already all looking at life sentences. Whether it's life sentence for Foreign Kingpin Act violations or terrorist organization operations, life is life. They're not going to, you know, there's a phrase in Spanish called another strike for the tiger. Well, you can only get so many lives.
Yeah, so interesting. So in their head, they're damned if you do, damned if you don't. They're going to get in trouble either way, whether it be for a terrorist organization.
Now on the American side, it's very interesting because seeing how they only operate out of 3 distribution hubs and a logistical hub east of the Mississippi, you need trucks, tractor trailers. Well, now those drivers providing material support. That's a 20-year mandatory minimum. So you're going to be able to squeeze the low-level operators, the people manning the stash houses, the people that are running the local distribution hubs, the people that are running the local little courier services. So it's going to create a tremendous amount of leverage for the American prosecutors to squeeze the American side of the operations. It's also going to put at jeopardy a lot of the money laundering operations because banks are not going to don't want to get hit with moving, terrorist money. And so, had this been done 20 years ago, it really would have impacted their money laundering operations. Today, it's mostly through China. So again, it's not going to really impact that aspect. But the individuals that are physically collecting the bulk cash, they're now participating in terrorist-related activities. So they're going from 30-month sentences to 20-year sentences. And so you can see how it's going to create a tremendous disruption on the American side of the operations if our government plays it wisely.
Did you see the other day a video came out from one of the cartels mentioning that they have no intentions of creating any harm in America?
They have a zero tolerance policy for any violent acts in the United States. They do not target police. They do not target law enforcement. They do not target judges, prosecutors, witnesses, even cooperators. The only thing you can do in the United States to engender an act of violence is theft. Everything at that level is at the consignment level. So if you have a 200-kilo account, they expect you to come back with their $3 million. If you rip them off, they'll come see you. Short of that, there are no sanctioned acts of violence in the United States on behalf of any cartel organization. Now, if you set a man up, his brother might come see you. His cousin might come see you. That's a personal beef. That's not cartel organization sanctioned. So a lot of times you'll see where you'll have a personal issue, but because the guy is operating on his own, they conflate it and attribute it to the cartel organization.